Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from everywhere you are. I'm so happy to be here with another great session. And actually, I think today we have an interesting session and with Vanessa. Also, we have some good news during my presentation. I will share with you. Let me add my screen in the presentation. Yes, today we have Vanessa. She wants to talk about the data solution in Microsoft 365 topic. It's very interesting. In the backstage, I talked with Vanessa. I'm so happy about the energy, about the topic, and I'm waiting for a start his presentation. And before that, we are part of Microsoft Learn Community. As you know, Microsoft Learn Community is a central hub about a lot of topic for learning based off the Microsoft technology. You can choose your learning path with certification or role path. Actually, the Microsoft AI Skill Challenge today is the go live. I will share the link in the chat during the session. And yeah, this is our amazing October trend. If you don't register any this interesting session, please register. Never miss that. All of our previous session update hosted in our YouTube channel. It's a good news. Today I received a good news from the Microsoft Zero Hero community. We have about 1,000 subscriber in our YouTuber channel. It's a good news. Thank you, all of the guys. And the last slide is our code of conduct. Be aware of other. Be friendly and passionate. Be welcoming and respectful. Be open to all question, viewpoint, be understanding of different. Be kind and considerate to other in the chat, in the question. Yeah, the time is to add minutes on the stage. Hello again.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Having
I'm
a
so
great day
happy
getting
to,
ready.
yeah, I'm so happy to having you all here, and I'm waiting for your start your presentation. And thanks again. And just for your information, all of the participants, you can ask your question in the chat. When it's the end of the session, we will answer your question. We have a Microsoft exam voucher discount for fundamental and advanced Microsoft exam. We select the best question as a winner. We provide end of the session. Yeah, Vanessa, the stage is yours. You can start your presentation. Let me add your presentation in the screen. I think
Alrighty.
everything is fine.
All right. We're ready to get going.
Yeah,
All
sure.
right, perfect. Thank you. By the way, thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to be able to share some knowledge, right? So, my name is Vanessa Toves. By trade, I am a Microsoft 365 solutions architect. And all that means is that I've worked with Microsoft technologies since the very first version of SharePoint on prem, Microsoft's BI suite on prem and SQL, and have followed my career's followed that path of those technologies all the way up into the cloud. Today we're going to talk about one of the things I that are near and dear like to me, which is solutions architecture. How to architect a solution in 365. Right. So let's step through that. It's going to be half presentation, and then the other half we're going to actually get in and talk about and look at some of the technologies. So first, let's start with a simple, housekeeping in terms of the solution, right? Much of what we do has to start with all the requirements, right? No technology is involved. In fact, you must even be a technology agnostic in terms um, of this problem, right? So whether you're a consultant, you work for an organization, right? Small, medium, large, doesn't really matter. We really put our listening ears on and our documentation ears on, and we're going to cover a number of these as we go through. And then once you have a baseline and understanding of what the business problem is, what you're solving, right, collectively, then, and of course, if Microsoft 365 technologies are a great fit, right, they are the appropriate fit, then we're going to talk about things within here. because a solution does not start and end with a Power Automate flow, right? It doesn't start and end with the technology. These are the technologies, by all means, those are apps that we use. But there's a lot of other things that we're going to touch on that you need to be prepared for, because what we think about when we think about solutions is long-term solution architecture, right? How long will this be solved utilizing these technologies? And many of the times that you're approached, there's been some pain that an organization has felt, right? Whether it's a department or you have a customer or whatever, a client, the pain doesn't really matter ultimately what that is. It could be a financial pain, it could be a time sensitive pain, it could be an audit, or even maybe your organization was scored externally on your customer support, right? So a number of these, I've heard all these in terms of the architecture or in terms of the problem. So when we start to listen to the customer and begin to break down this team and this problem, one of the things that I have found to be very useful is the visualization of your understanding, right? So the more you can make what you're hearing visual for the people that you're doing the requirements for, right, for your customer or client, the better off you are, because generally the average user, the average business person is more visual. So you can document this out all in, straight document form, like text after row up, text after text, right? But they're visual. So as much as possible, be very visual in your requirements. This also serves as a great form of sign off, right? When you go live with something and a person says 2 months into the project and you're ready to go live, they're like, oh, no, we need this. And I'm like, that's not what you have. This is our release. This is what we're going to focus on, right? This also holds the customer, your internal customer, whoever you're building this for, um, to this very specific thing of what you're going to solve for, right? Documentation also will provide, and especially flows. I like a swim lane. The swim lane is very good, whether the lanes are by role or function or by department, by individual, whatever that may be. But it also serves as a great foundation for your testing, right? I expect this to happen in this flow. Did it happen when I went through the test? Right. So visualize your requirements for your customers. That's huge. Right? So now let's talk about these steps when you think about it. Right. We've identified the flow, right, and we've laid that out. We've done the requirements of that. And before, of course, as I stated before, or I wrote up there before, that before you can make any improvements to something, right, you need to understand what it is. Now, not everything needs, I don't want to say you shouldn't, not everything necessarily needs to be automated. And you have to think about the implications of that. A good example is a manual step. We're going to use HR. An HR employee recognition is the example we're going to use as part of this. One of the manual steps that the HR person is using is that they go to their Workday or their ADP and they check a status of something. That's it. It's a manual step. Now, when you're designing this, you have the options, of course, of either continuing that manual step, maybe in that particular thing. That's an external step outside of your process. Or you can do some full integrations, right? And say, oh, I want that thing to automatically happen. You have to really, really be careful of those types of things, because you can either be an architect or a developer that solves one problem a year because I don't want to say you've made it more complex, maybe. Um, or you can solve 10 problems, right? So understand that not every step has to be uh, or has to be dynamic, I should say, or integrated. Understand those impacts to that. Right? Now, we're going to talk about data, throughout this. Today, data is a lot different, even than, it was 5 years or like 10 years ago, even in the on-prem world, because of the nature of data. Now we have to talk about retention. We need to understand the sensitivity of information. Is there PII in any of the solutions that we're collecting, because you need to stay within compliance, right? In compliance to how you're managing the data that's in here. Understand your company's requirements regarding data, because if you are housing this within 365, even that, be aware, be prepared, right? How will users access this data? Are there different requirements as to who can see what? So during your requirements, don't just say, oh, you need to see Vanessa Toves, but does everyone need to see her birthday, right? Does someone else need to see her social security? I don't know. So the more you understand this, right, the better off you are and better prepared you are for what's going to affect your downstream solution development. Understand your SLA, right? Back to the customer. I mean, the platform itself has a like 99.99% uptime. That's Microsoft, and these days they're a lot more stable. Right? I remember when SharePoint Online first came out, and the first couple years were interesting to say the least, right? In terms of stability. Ultimately, understand what the SLA is. There are still times where, if the solution in some way is stopping, right? If some parts of it stop, what is the expectation? Because what you're doing now is you're transitioning potentially a manual process where you had someone that could knock on a door or someone could walk a file over, right, to something that's automated. And if the automation stops, what's the impact? Which means you need to know how to communicate this even to your IT leadership team to say, right, this is a level one, a level two, right, uptime. So understand those types of implications as well. And a lot of that comes too with the data, the business process that you're implementing, or the business problem that you're solving, right? And then, of course, plan for and understand what your backup team is doing, your security team is doing in terms of what's going to happen. What happens if your company experiences, um, uh, corruption or modification or ransomware, whatever that may be, right? So let's talk about the roles. Now, there's two really different sets of roles that we deal with, that I would deal with, and that's the one role is the project team, and that might be, your project sponsor, the actual solution owner itself, right at the business level, business owner, and then other various members of the team. And then there's the individuals that are going to interact with the data that you're building a solution around, right? Who has full control? Is there user management? Right? Is there security management? What are those types of things? What's your, are you prepared with rights or roles and responsibilities? Right. So understand who's going to be able to edit, because every one of these types of roles you will have to ensure that you've done appropriate training, which we'll talk about. You also need to ensure that you've got the right accounts to test throughout your solution. And validate, right, this solution. Now, you might be one individual, right? You're the jack of all trades. You do everything, and you've got this project. Just because you are the one person, that doesn't imply that you should still run as this as a program, right? This is a solution, and you need to also be prepared. With success comes the opportunity for you to potentially add resources or add, other applications, add other licenses, right? With whatever it is that you're solving, someone might see the value of what you're building and say, "Hey, can we do this over here?" And you're going to have to say, "Yeah, you know what? I need this. I need this. I'm like the business analyst. I'm the project manager. I'm the everything." Right? So understand what all the roles are, even for every single solution that you have, because you need to position this too as you don't want to run this. You don't want to be the bottleneck in this. And a year into it, you're still involved in the day to day, right? So remember what your role is in the organization. Yours is to design and develop these new solutions, not to manage and maintain the solution for the department you just created something for. Right? So you need to be able to step away from that, and they need to, right? These departments or individuals or teams need to be self-servicing, right? In terms of the care and feeding of the solution long term. So we'll continue on documentation by almost every account. There's no one that I know that loves documentation other than a documentation person. But documentation is huge. It's also part of success. Now, you're going to have the roles and responsibilities, the reason why you created this, the purpose. You're going to have things that are visible to the users, right? The end users that are going to interact with it. I've always found that short videos are best, especially now with the workforce being younger, right? As they're and this generation or of individuals are more video centric, right? So um, have have that documented, have that on your intranet site. Talk about the roles and responsibilities, and have corresponding information for that. But document that so that these individuals that are involved in the process, remember, it's all about you stepping away. You're going to step away. You're going to provide them this information. You're going to say, all right, you're a content author for this knowledge management platform, whatever it may be. That means you have this access, you have these responsibilities, you have these tools, right? Right. This is the type of thing, especially on the business side, that really will aid you in that. Now, let's talk about data, right? The data that we collect. Now, you have different needs, and in my experience, as early on, I did database migrations and reports and dashboards and all of that. So, and what I found also in application development was that reporting was always the last consideration, which is really interesting because it's the final step, the data visualization. So oftentimes I would get a request for a report that would say, we need to do this. And I found myself having to flip the world around and do so much data manipulation when if we could have interjected that earlier and collected that data right through the process, that would have been a huge time saver. So understand what your schema is, right, of this solution that you're creating, whether it's one table or multiple tables, whatever it may be, because going to become very helpful for you, especially as you are progressing through the development of a solution, right? And especially if you also have multiple individuals that are part of a team that's developing this, right? Know what you're going to need when you're going to need it. Where are you going to source this information from? And how is it that I can have and start a solution with collecting 5 pieces of information, possibly, and I end up with 35 pieces of information that I can use to report on? Right. So this is where you, as the architect, also need to know what's available to you. What's available for me to extend that? You want to ask as few questions as possible, ask the right questions, and not everything should be required in the information gathering phase, right? So, yes, you want them to do that, but oftentimes what you find is with really great visualizations of the data to whatever the solution may be, um, you'll find that just by the nature of people understanding and seeing the value of that, they will likely be driven to tag it, right? To tag things. So, consider that, know where you're going to source it, right? Know where I'm going to introduce it. As a good example is I oftentimes I don't even bother with a lot of pulling in individual data about a user because I know that in Power BI, if I so choose to use that, right, I have the ability to actually expand in Power BI and extract that data, right? But this is also important to know. If I plan on using some of this data further upstream, like in the approvals, I have to have it available to me. Right? So we'll talk about that as we get into more of this information. So um, carving out a problem statement. I've listened. I've done requirements for a couple of weeks. I've talked to everyone. I've got approval. Right, everyone saw my documentation. Now you want to have a statement that represents what you're doing, what you're solving, and what the pain is. Right, who is involved? What's the pain? Are you saving time, money, or both? Right, and what's missing? What's the gap? We have an employee recognition program that requires too much handholding and takes too much time. The employees send their recognition in via email, and HR forwards that to supervisors and executives for approval. Oftentimes, the approvers don't have the information they need, and we must chase information. It's time consuming, inefficient, and has poor reporting for HR leadership and executives. This is a statement that everyone on this team can agree with and should agree with. Does it address the core problem? Because it is also something that you will use throughout to gut check yourself as you're developing. Is the thing that I'm making right here in line with this statement? And if it is, great, I will continue. But if it's not, I need a justification as to doing it. Because if you're going to solve a different business problem, right? If you begin to stray, that's also becomes really problematic. So carve this out, do it with the team that you're building or your client, or share it back with them. Become a really good wordsmith. And then sometimes, right, as part of this, if you're a consultant, you might have to pitch it, or even internally, you might actually have to pitch this solution to an IT steering committee because maybe you need a consultant, or maybe you need a BI developer, maybe you need additional licensing, right? So you can consider. It's one of my favorite things I learned at a knowledge management conference is a future state statement. It's kind of like a story that talks about the success of this thing that you did, this problem you solved in the past, right? And introduces all that. I'm not going to get into teaching you about a future state story he does, but you can look it up. But just think about the impacts of that, right? You should have, there should be a vision for this, not a technology vision, not an app vision, but a vision for the impact, both with the business right statement, business problem statement, and even the future state story. That also helps the business or the company that you're working with know that you've listened to them, that you understand. Right. So now we're going to get into a few slides about the technology of things on the Microsoft side, and then we're going to jump into the demo. All right. So this is one of the most important things that you need to know about developing anything. What you design and what you make is you making a commitment for the organization to the users, right? So you need to be careful about what you have, right? What you're hooking this to, because you might need, do you need support? Does this need additional licensing? Do you need, will this have a storage implication? Are you going to be accessing certain APIs that are monetized, right? How are you going to train? So it's not you just making a power app, but it's the organization having to support power apps in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when maybe you've moved on to something else, right? So this is what you're doing. You're committing the organization to support this. Now, licensing used to be a lot simpler. Now it's so much more complex. So the most important thing there is to not hook your solution to something the organization doesn't have license to. You might have license to, and maybe 5 people out of your organization that have that E5, or maybe you had some other license. But if you have to, if you're going into an app and clicking that button that says, oh, let's do the 90-day trial, and you build something with that 90-day trial, and that 90-day trial requires the entire organization to also then either do a 90-day trial or be licensed. That's the commitment I'm talking about, right? So potentially, you could be taking your organization's licensing model from like $5, $7, $12 a user, and without even knowing it, just by the nature of what you've developed, you have committed the organization to a $62 per user per month licensing, right? Be very careful. This is why I say it's good to invest in these test licenses, right? These test users, because you're going to put these users into the roles that they need to be put in so that you can validate access without having to touch anything. You want to know this stuff before. This can be very costly for the organization that you're building a solution for, especially if after 3 months or 6 months, you've done all this work and everyone's excited. and then it comes down, they go turn it on, and half the company can't access it because they're on a business premium license and everyone else is on an E5, right? Be careful. Take steps to um, prevent this. Try and find it earlier on, as early as possible. And if you do need that license, you have the reasons. You must justify that before. You have to make sure that the organization, not the business team, right? That IT, the one that signs the check, the one that has to deal with the Microsoft renewals, that they are aware of this. Okay? Okay, we'll continue. Now, when we're developing, well, now that we're going to begin to, I've listened, we've got approval, now we're going to start doing stuff. You have options, and options are can make something very easy or very complex, and somewhere in between. You have options of doing things out of the box. You can customize things. That means I'm going to use the tools that I have, just tweak it, make the changes I have it all within, or I'm going to write something fully custom. Right? Those are options, but those options have, once again, implications. When we develop, whether you have a team doing this, you have to think about the long-term management and maintenance of this solution. So some consultants believe that they're going to custom code everything so that they hook an organization to always keeping their contract. I know that's the way some people are. Some people think it's a sense of, or some people want to just do it. They want to write something custom because they want to and they want to try it. But that's not always the right business decision, right? So I'm not saying don't write anything custom. I'm saying you have to be realistic about the support of that long term, right? And what would happen if you left the organization, or if you moved somewhere else within that organization, um, and something had to be changed, right, in a year from now. Now, let's talk about scalability. Now, sometimes when you are solving a problem in an organization, right, for a company, you might see a bigger problem, right? You might see that that little thing that one little department is asking for absolutely is something that everyone could benefit from. But the organization isn't there. They're not there right now, right? They're not ready for that big change, that big shift. So it doesn't mean that you need to scrap everything when they do become ready. What it means is you should prepare for that. You should design for that. Whether it's that one extra product, or that one extra team, or that one extra, site, or that one extra whatever that thing is, the object is that you're doing. All right. Start by thinking, if you're starting something with maybe just one department, ask the question, right? What would I need to do to build this out for an entire department? What about an entire region, or just North America, or whatever it may be? Challenge yourself at the front, because it's so much easier to build in these things and not use them than to build something out so specific, and so customized and tailored only for one, that you have to make five of something similar, right? For different departments. Now we'll talk more. Now let's talk about like approvals, of course. Everyone, I love Power Automate. It's just so much change the world, change the world of being a developer, or creating anything. So when we're thinking about these processes, we also have to think, right? This is the first part. That first part was laying out the flow. The second part, now, after you have approval, you're going to consider and interject improvements into that process. You're going to not just plan for success, right? Vanessa clicked this, then this happened, but you also need to plan for failure. And I think that's where a lot of people miss, is in planning for failure. What happens if this happens, right? Does the approval start over? Do we cycle back through? Or does it end? And then you should communicate to these users. And you have choices about where you're going to communicate, right? So I'm fond of saying you communicate with them where they work. And users today work in two places. They work in their email still, and they also now are working, and they have Teams open. Now, you might be a SharePoint guru, but I learned many years ago that building an entire UI out in SharePoint for different users, yes, that might be beneficial, but to be honest, I want efficiency. I'm looking for a process to get through. And if I can communicate to that user at this particular step and say in an email, hey, this is what's happening, right? 2 days have passed, X, Y, and Z has occurred. You're being notified because of this. Or if I can embed that information in the approval process, remember our schema, remember that schema, right? If I've determined I want to have this information and embed that in these approvals or embed that in this email communication, I need that information accessible, right? So um, help with milestones, right? If the process is 5 steps deep, do you have to do it at all times? No, by all means, you don't have to embed this much. You can make it more summarized. But what I find is that if you can embed this data, especially in email, it becomes searchable and it helps the user find this. It also helps your process by standardizing things like in the subject or standardizing the body so that your users that are interacting with this and receiving this notification will they'll be able to understand and find this information a lot easier. A couple more slides. Now, the other end, right at the end of this is the data visualization. We'll actually go look at some of this. I can't stress the importance of this. Not just to from a let's go build a dashboard or a report. Right? You absolutely should do that. But I've always found that the adoption of your solution, and even the changes that are required, right, of an organization, can so easily be um, accessible, like available by a great dashboard. Right? I learned early on in my career building dashboards, and whether you build them often or not yourself, or you have a BI developer that's or whatever they're called nowadays, data engineer or something, data scientist, that understand what it is, right? What you're trying to present. Remember going back to that business statement, that business problem. HR needs a view, executives need a view. They need to know what's happening with this, right, with this system. This now documentation again. This is on the other side. This is on the development side. You want to document this, whether you're using like a GitHub repository for your organization, or you're using a site, or you're using a site for all your projects, or one site for every project, whatever it may be. You have to maintain a standard of documenting the technological aspects. Now, here's how this helped me. All right. Last year, I got a call from an old customer of mine, and they said, hey, we need to make a change to this, but we don't know where to go. And I know my standards, right, in terms of how I name things. And I said, okay, yeah, let's go take a look. Go look for this site. And it's a SharePoint team site, no big deal. And I'm like, okay, let's go look at the FAQs, because throughout the process of developing it, I also started building it as a knowledge base. And that data, that information about, what happens if this happens? What do you do if this happens? Who do I contact if this happens? That is also information that can be shared from a technical perspective with your help desk ticketing system, or just you, right? Once again, it depends on how big you are, how big the organization is. But I was actually in, and when you build a lot of these types of things, oftentimes they kind of just like merge. Uh, I couldn't tell you how many times I've built an employee recognition throughout the years. They all have different small differences, for whatever reason. So the site absolutely helped me remind me about certain things. I'm like, okay, number one, this account, let's go double check this account. And sure enough, someone had deleted the account. They were doing cleanup. They had a new admin on the admin side. No one had it documented. They didn't have it documented somewhere. So this documentation is going to be very helpful from a technological perspective, right? Also, as you have iterations of things, iterations of anything. Like if you have your Power Apps or your Power BI, you can actually extract your your Power BI, not Power, yeah, Power BI and Power Automates into packages and dump them into a library. Right before I make changes, I'm going to go save something so that in case something happens to it, I can actually go back to this particular asset, this dashboard. All right, last two slides, and then we're going to go into the demo. Let's take a look at these. Now, I work for a data protection, data security company. I went to work for them about 4 years ago. And it was because after the years of bringing customers into 365, I saw a trend of what was happening. And I want you to know that your data in 365 is not immune to attack or data loss, right? It's happening. It's happening every single day. Now, if you have not read this digital defense report by Microsoft, the new one's coming out next month, but this report will, especially the executive summary, it highlights the threats to the ecosystem. You need to know because you need to now become a champion, right? You are building these solutions in 365. You are migrating and transitioning into this dynamic and data-driven solution. No more paper anywhere, no more file. Now everything is online. So you need to become a champion and you need to go knock on the door of your IT security team and say, what are we doing? All right, what are we doing to protect our 365? All right, you need to knock on the door to your backup team and say, what are we doing? Because if these 5 solutions went down, we would come to a halt in one whole department, right? That happens, right? So understand that your ecosystem, the ecosystem of 365 or Microsoft's ecosystem, is not immune. So protect your data. All right, let's go take a look. And we'll look at this solution, right? So simple, remember what the problem was. The problem was I was going to build employee recognition. So first part of that is where do I collaborate with this team? I've got a team, absolutely, whatever you want to call it. But in that, this is where I'm going to be processing information. This is where the internal team is going to be accessing information, right? This is also where I'm going to provide some help and how to for that team. This is how the solution works, right? So I'm going to build this site up to be more than just a place where I'm saving the information. Now, remember that schema that we're talking about. It doesn't matter where you save the data, right? Today, SharePoint lists or even a document library if it's attached to a file. There's the Dataverse, right? You have so many options. SharePoint, there's not much, I haven't done with SharePoint. I find it to be a great model, a way to model a solution and flush out a lot of things. So expand, in terms of this is a straight up list, custom metadata. And now comes the part where I need to input data, right? I'm taking the first decision of like, where am I going to input the data? All right, you have choices. They have the new forms, number 1. And then you also have a form 2. You also have Power App. Remember, we're talking about you have to be realistic. The smaller you are, like if it's just you, are you going to want to manage and maintain this one solution? Number 1. Can you become a specialist? If you can, and you have the ability to, and you have a support of a team, and you're going to want to build out Power Apps, absolutely. And I'm not trying to discourage you from doing that, any and all of that, but just knowing where your points of input. I'm not quite there yet with the SharePoint form. I think there's one thing that I really love about it in terms of in terms of inputting. Sorry, my phone's going. Inputting the data, which is you've got a people picker, and I'm like, oh, I've been waiting for a damn people picker for so long, right? So this is all basically all tied to the schema of the list. Great, that's about it, right? So you lose a lot, and if by all means, right, the team that's here is going to be inputting this data, maybe you might want to use it. However, if you're dealing with something that's more mass input from the outside and then only a few people accessing the data, I still am very fond of a form. It still works. There's a number of things that I really do like about it. One is also just how well, and this is the part two where you have to begin to learn the intricacies of each one of these to see how you're going to use it, right? So I'll give you a good example for that. Um, Simple branching. So I have an award type. Great. These are the four different choices I have. And then now I have a branching that's associated to it. Now, this All Star Award, Outstanding Achievement Award, Excellence Award, Founders Award, these are all different choices, but they become unique to which type, right? So I really like that. And then, but I'm going to ultimately write all of the values to this in my SharePoint list, just back to two fields, the award type and the All Star or the award category. Right. So just because I have four fields here, that doesn't mean I'm going to have and expand on that because I want to have really good, concise reporting. And I'm not going to house, right? I'm not going to create a column in my schema called the All Star Award and grab that. So if we come back here, you want to think about even your design of and the user experience. Where can I have the best user experience when developing this, and what's going to work for me? So if I have a word type, great. But I'm only, like I said, I might have four different choices and values in there, but I'm only going to store them in one, right? I'm going to do this with Power Automate, of course. So know what the pros and cons are of each, when you would use one versus the other. It is nice that you can have and get pre-built links with some of the information already pre-built. Having different sections, right? The only pitfall about utilizing this for people is if they're gonna have to open, do a straight text for like an email, right? So there's still some quirks about that. So figure out where your input is. I'm not discouraging Power Apps. I'm just saying, think about what you have, what you need to support long term. You have this big solution now that you're building out, right? So Power Automate, still great, world's greatest, improved so much over the years. Understand what you can do with and without with licensing, with specific licensing. I also have unique accounts that run certain processes, mainly because of how I'd like to design certain things. But right, as I'm stepping through these Power Automates, you have options. You can either create big massive one, and have it step through, or you break them out. There's pros and cons to each one. As I said, for the purpose of this, I created several different flows just so you can see, right, what this, like how my thought process goes as I'm going through this. A couple of things about the Power Automate. This is part two where I'm extending, right? So I'm extending the data collection, right? So originally, I'm only going to ask for, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 7 fields. I asked for 7. By the time my Power Automate flow is done, I have incorporated the user profile details of the user. I've also pulled in the data from the responder. I've also gotten information from the employee manager, which I manage in another list, or you can cycle back through, right? So you can extend the data. That this is where you're extending the schema of this record, right? It's one of the nicest things about getting data about this. And then for me, and once again, right, I know the architecture, at least of what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm basically creating the same flow, but I'm only doing something different. I'm just saying, hey, if the award type is equal to all star, then do something. Now, great. I go and create the record in the list. No, nothing crazy there. The other thing I'm doing is I log things. All right, so I'm going to go back to the site and I'm going to talk to you about logging. So as you're going through and building a solution, generally, I can go in and I look at this employee recognition and I have current state. And yes, I have prior state because I can go back to the version history. But as we all know, in the world of data and trying to access that, that's not really easy to get to. I'm going to have to go and use the API to go call the prior versions. I'm like, okay. So what I've done for many years is I've, at the end of every process, like something transitions from open to close, right? It transitions from, sorry, submitted to processed. I actually attach and I create a log file. The log file serves two purposes. One, you will have a history of change of a record. And you can do this on everything. I've done this on legal contracts from a legal perspective. Attorneys love this, right? They want to know not just everyday modifications, right? They're big things, big shifts. If something changed from this, if an approver that, whatever it is, at the end of your process, as you're processing the record, right? It's going through the flow, you're going to log this because it tells you a couple of key things: who interacted with it, right? When was it? So even if you're looking to optimize your time, the data that it provides you becomes very valuable. How long is it taking start to finish, right? How long does it take to go from this stage to this stage? That becomes extremely painful when you're trying to go iterate through version history, right, with the API to get that data. So you can use this also from a reporting perspective, right? You might have 250 versions of of a list item, but maybe you only have seven uh, absolute items in this log that are expected, and each one, right? You can understand that shift. This can I don't like mimicking the entire schema. I don't. It just is not really valuable. This is really all about what problem can I am I solving with this, and generally it's about reporting that I'm going to utilize this information in my solution. The other thing is not everyone can read this data, or maybe everyone only reads this data, right? So you can actually have a security model in here where everyone can just read, right? So the log becomes very valuable. I look at this, and when things transition, I'll add this step into my log or into the process, log it, great, move on, right? And then, of course, comes the communication. You guys are all very familiar with a lot of this. You know, like this communication that I have is it becomes, right, one, two, three. There's three sources of data that I'm pulling in here. Oftentimes, when I'm doing the requirements, I'm going to create a Word document with the format, and I just make the business fill it out. You're like, tell me what you want to see in these emails when it goes from this stage to this stage. That's just part of the requirements document. So it becomes a simple cut and paste for me, right? So the value of the Power Automate, absolutely, in terms of the architecture of your solution, utilizing it, logging. I'm just looking up here at my other screen too. Getting the logging the data, extending the data, huge. All right, so I'm just looking at our time. I think we have just a few more minutes maybe. All right, so we did our input options, right? Okay, great. Power ups, I already did that one. We did the log. We visualize our data. Okay, let's go take a look at this. So here's my Power BI dashboard. It's a simple thing. I've hooked it to a SharePoint list, and I hooked it to the log. Now, I'm fond of dashboards that oftentimes don't always just look like dashboards, right? So as you can see that you can visualize things very differently, right? Whether it's through this awesome, process of whatever it may be, you can actually tap back into your flow that you've created, right? This dynamic thing, and create filtered views on these particular things, because right, part of this thing too is just like validation. I'm not saying this has to be for everyone's view, but ultimately, if I'm coming through here, we think about those audiences that we need to solve that problem for, right? That was our HR team. They needed better visibility. Okay, so I want to give them better visibility. And then if we think about just those 5 fields, right? If I only had those original 7 fields in my solution, my views are limited, right? My views of reporting become limited to just those 7 fields. But because I've extended my schema, my data repository in the background, I've now opened up my reporting so I can flip this world upside down and say, okay, I want to look at this over time. I want to look at this by department, right? I want to look at this by whatever, by department, by time. I might publish multiple versions of this out. Someone wants the raw data view. I want to look at it for just one particular aspect of this. And so the visualization of this solution, absolutely 100%, not only does it drive the better adoption of the solution, but it shows if you do not have this aspect and it just ends, it's hard for people to see your great work. So whether you build it in Excel by attaching, doing an Excel list back here, if you're more comfortable, but build a dashboard, build a report, do it, visualize your solution, and then of course, right? I think we're kind of wrapping up here, but we've covered a lot. I mean, we've covered a lot of the aspects of fundamental sound architecture about where do we collect data, how do we secure data, how do we share knowledge, who are the individuals that are taking part of this, right? How do we test, how are we building out, what are these other things that no one has told us to do that we know that we should be doing that will help us both in auditing and reporting, right? How do we do, what does a solution look like? For me, I did a lot of these types of things. For you, maybe you're going to take some of what you've learned here. Or maybe you know it all, know a lot of this, and you might get that one little piece. And I think that's great because we all ultimately just continue to build on our knowledge, right? And all in the benefit of this awesome platform we get to work on, Microsoft 365 and Azure, and for the customers or companies that we work for. All right. Well, thank you so very much for the opportunity to present today and on architecting an end-to-end solution in Microsoft 365. I think we're just waiting now for our host to come back.
Yes, thank you again. It's very nice presentation. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Vanessa.
You're welcome.
And guys, if you have any question, please ask your question in the chat. Actually, in the future, you can connect with the Vanessa in the LinkedIn or social network to ask in the future question. And also, just for your information, we will upload this session on our YouTube channel, and you can watch more again in the future. Okay, it seems there is no comment or question in the chat. We can end of this stream. Do you have any comment, Vanessa? Is there?
No.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
See you next session.
Bye-bye.